of this year, and a second phase of that in second quarter of 2019. We're going to implement an electronic medication administration record, which will also help to identify and address the recommendations from the audit. We're in the process of updating our 10-year capital plan. And as you heard, there's an ask for $1 million to go into capital, and that capital will primarily be used to purchase beds, therapeutic tubs, and lifts, as well as to support the implementation of the IT plan. In terms of communication, we heard loud and clear through the stakeholder engagement sessions on how we can be improving our communications. We've developed an extensive communication plan for all stakeholders, and that is in the process of being rolled out. We, as well, you heard earlier today as well about a shift-to-shift report. We're in the process of developing a standardized template to follow on shift exchange to ensure that staff are provided with the appropriate information in order to support the residents' care and services. And the final area, resident care and service delivery. Greg talked today around volunteerism and the importance of recruitment of volunteers. Volunteer recruitment and always will be one of our primary objectives in long-term care. Volunteers enhance the quality of life for our residents, either through programmings or assistance with the activities of daily living. We currently have over 600 volunteers in our homes. These volunteers help to support programs such as Montessori, and we also have been implementing in one of the homes, which will be rolled out across, a music memory program. And again, that was highlighted in Greg's presentation. As well, in our recreation program this year, we have an objective to introduce 10 new culturally diverse programs in each one of the homes. In addition to this, with the compliance plans, we developed a new policy and procedure around the development of care plans, which included a posting of a Cardex in the room for the residents for easy access for staff to be able to refer to when providing care.
Thank you, Dean. I just wanted to take an opportunity, like yourselves, to thank Greg for his expertise. His review was comprehensive and thorough. The information he provided was invaluable. It included interviews, observations, research, and comparators. And we did hear from staff, families and residents that they absolutely appreciated the opportunity to speak with him confidentially and privately. I think the overview of the information we provided this afternoon demonstrates that there has been intensive work that has been underway since last summer, and that a lot of feedback has been provided from these different sources, and we've been confident that that feedback will be going forward and making changes as necessary. One thing that we heard unanimously is the need to increase staffing levels, and so we absolutely welcome the motion this morning, and we also are conscious of the need that we have to look at our hiring practices as well and orientation, but this will go a long way, as well as the report that will be going to FEDCO tomorrow for the $1 million for new equipment. We also want to point out that there was a recent announcements by the provincial government for additional funding that will come forward, so we'll absolutely leverage that funding in addition. At this point, we have come a long way in terms of fully understanding and appreciating the needs and profiles of our residents. We have very much evolved from what was assisted living to care for residents living with both dementia and increasing more complex medical needs, as outlined by Greg and presentation to you in September. We therefore need progressive transformative change, which is imperative to reducing the risk to our residents. Our job is to support our staff, provide them with the necessary tools, accountabilities, resources, and training to ensure that we provide care and services that residents deserve and families expect. I want to thank everyone for providing critical feedback and completing reviews for our homes. I want to acknowledge staff in this department and corporately who continue to work tirelessly to make the necessary changes. It has been a stressful time. Staff have been under a microscope, as Steve mentioned earlier today. We had 3 sets of reviews happening in January at one time, and some assumptions attributed to all staff. So given the positive feedback overall, though, that residents feel safe and cared for, we will build on what we are doing well. So at the very core of all of the reviews and the staff responses is the desire to provide safe and nurturing environment for all of our 717 residents. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee.
Thank you very much, Ms. Burrell and your team for your response. We have a number of questions, starting with Councillor Egley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of things. I want to go back to the question of a separate committee or board. And I just want to confirm that this is something that, by approving this report today, what we're simply doing is we're sending it off to the governance process for discussion and review, because it seems to me, and I don't want to put Councillor Caudry on the spot here, but it seems to me that we have a valuable role model in the public health in terms of bringing together elected officials as well as subject matter specialists, and not lawyers, but you know, doctors, nurses, healthcare workers. So I'm not suggesting that's something that he adds to his workload of his board. I'm happy to hear that, but I think it's worthy of a discussion to look at that model, see how it functions, and have a deeper dive into that issue. So I'm just looking for confirmation that we are, by approving this or accepting this report, we're moving that discussion over into the governance piece, into the clerk's office for further discussion and review to be put forward at the beginning of next term.
Absolutely, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. The other piece I want to talk about is the dollars. So you've given us a figure of what you need to get through to the end of this year, and you've also given us a figure as to what you need going forward. And it's not an inconsequential number. And we've heard both from the consultant and from yourselves that there is a role for the city to play in the provision of this service, but there's also a role for the province to play. And Janice, she said not even 5 minutes ago that there's an opportunity for more funding out of the province. So as part of what we're doing here today, does it help if was given, for example, for the chair and the mayor, perhaps they've done a motion, which I think is going to be well received, but for the mayor and the chair also to send a written request to the ministry and say, this is an issue that we're dealing with in the city, and we're taking it seriously, we're taking these steps, and we're looking for the province to also jump in and do what they can in terms of additional funding. And I'm looking at the chair, she's nodding her head. So if you would take that as direction and just to bolster our position and make it clear that in the city we're concerned about this, we want to fix it, but we're looking to our partners to do that. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Egley. I think that's a good suggestion. Councillor Nuspa.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up on a couple of questions that I raised with Mr. Fougere earlier. And the first is, and apologies for not recalling these numbers from the November presentation, but I am interested in understanding, in terms of the baseline data, how our 4 city-run facilities are doing vis-a-vis the quality indicators that I set out earlier. Where do we sit on those indicators currently?
Madam Chair, as of the third quarter of 2017, the numbers we receive are sort of outdated. They're 90 days in abeyance. So there's the number of publicly reported indicators that are out there. One is around improved or remained independent at mid-loss, and our homes are slightly below the provincial number at 29. Worsened or remained dependent in early loss ADL, we're performing better than the provincial number at 34.7. Worsened mood and symptoms of depression, we're performing better than the provincial average at 23.4. Antipsychotics without a diagnosis, the provincial number is at 19.7, and 3 of our 4 homes are below the provincial average, and 1 of them is at 19.9, which is pretty much at the provincial average. Falls, the provincial average is 16.3. 3 of our homes are below the number for falls, and 1 is slightly above at 17.1. Daily physical restraints, the provincial number is 4.6. Our homes are around 10%, so we have some room to improve in relation to physical restraints. In terms of pain, the provincial number is 5.4. 3 of our homes are below the provincial average, and 1 is higher at 6.6%. Worsened pain, the average is 10. 2 of our homes are 10, 1 is at 10.2, and 1 is at 10.7. So we're close to the provincial number on those. The other one is around pressure ulcers. The provincial number is 2.7. 2 of our homes are below. 2 are higher, 1 at 3.3 and 1 at 4%. So overall, our homes are performing pretty close to the provincial average on the public indicators.
Thank you. And the reason I asked that question in part is twofold. One is, as I said earlier, higher staffing is intuitively a good thing, but it's not an indicator. My assumption is with higher staffing, the expectation is your quality outcomes are better. Is that a fair way of interpreting the benefit of staffing as you get on your quality indicators better outcomes, correct?
Madam Chair, we would anticipate through our quality improvement plans that we would see improvements in the areas, especially around assessing in advance, around safety for residents by having more staff, more awareness to watch for indicators of responsive behaviors.
Great. And again, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I certainly support the idea of budgeting more money for long-term care. I do think, though, the question needs to be posed, and this is a great example of something that I don't know the answer, so I'm going to pose it to you, and I hope you know the answer, is if you look at the overall effectiveness and efficacy of our long-term care system, is putting $2.2 million into staffing. Do we have confidence that that's the right way to spend the money? I mean, that's the recommendation of our third-party evaluator, but in fairness, he was looking at a particular aspect of that system. And again, I'm not asking the question because I oppose it. On the contrary, what I'm wondering is staff confident that $2.2 million added to the budget each year is best spent on the suggestion by our third-party evaluator, or given that we have a LHIN wait list of 3,200 people as of last year, does it make more sense in terms of overall health outcomes in the City of Ottawa to use that money to increase the number of long-term beds? I mean, just as an example, I don't know the answer. I'm asking that because I think it's important that you give us advice on whether you think $2.2 million added to your budget, how can that best be used to improve overall health outcomes for residents in our city?
Consistently, we heard that the #1 issue was having additional personal support workers, so that there's less rushing, more availability, more responsiveness to call bells, less chances of neglect in terms of providing service in a timely way. And we are below the provincial average. So personally, I think this is the best investment. Of course, we will continue to review all of the other recommendations and look at other options to improve our outcomes, and we will bring those forward as part of the 2019 budget.
So I guess a follow-up question to that, thank you for that answer, is the third-party review also recommended some investment, let's call them in more quasi-management or quality oversight jobs. And from what I understood from the chair's motion, there's no suggestion that we spend money on those 5 positions for the time being in the 2018 budget year. Again, is with the idea of saying yes to 35 PSWs, but no to a quality and risk manager, no to a nursing practice manager, no to an HR management, no to admission coordinators, and no to staff development at the resources within that $2.2 million envelope.
So we do have a request into the LHIN for a nurse practitioner. So again, we're going back to leveraging all different sources of revenue. We also have had conversations with Donna Gray and her HR and labor relations, as well as organizational development. We have also been looking at some of the functions that Mr. Fougere outlined in terms of our social work and so forth, to look at their roles and responsibilities and removing some of the administration so that they can concentrate on those tasks. So we will take those away and look at other sources and mechanisms and processes to get that expertise. And again, if we feel that there's a pressure, we will bring it back in 2019.
I guess the question that I'm wondering is, would it be helpful in terms of giving staff flexibility to conduct the hiring in a way, I mean, this has all happened relatively quickly. I mean, we got this report an hour ago. And your motion was read out half an hour ago. And so while I'm prepared to vote on it today, I'm just wondering if it wouldn't make sense to say, okay, we're going to put $2.2 million into this, $800,000 in this fiscal year, but can we not give staff flexibility? Let's say it makes more sense to hire 30 PSWs and take the money from the between 30 and 35 and hire a nursing practice manager. I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but I wouldn't want to tie staff's hands if they felt that, you know, upon looking at this over the coming weeks, it made more sense to construct this slightly differently. So I think that's a friendly amendment. I'm looking to staff to see, again, I want to make sure that we're giving you the tools to take these recommendations and the additional resources and apply them in a way that you think is most effective, because we can't make that choice for you. So if you think there's a small possibility that you would want to see a little bit of flexibility in how that money is spent, then I think our motion should give that.
Since it's my motion, I don't think there's any doubt that we need to hire all 35 PSWs. I think that's pretty clear that we're understaffed. It's 18 minutes of per person in all 4 of our homes. But what the motion does say is also that we are delegating authority to the general manager on the other $1 million that will be moved at code tomorrow, in order to give the general manager flexibility to use that money. So if we need more registered nurses, for example, the general manager will have the flexibility to use some of that $1 million in order to fulfill need.
But just on that, I mean, are we even confident that there are 35 trained PSW applicants who we know we could hire in this fiscal year, again, to satisfy the $800,000 that we're getting? I mean, it strikes me, given that training and education was actually one of the issues we heard about, I don't know enough about the labor pool to know whether it's going to be easy to hire 35 quality PSWs in the short time that we're giving staff. So you may be right, Chair, that the need is there, and I'm not arguing that, but it would strike me as being unfortunate if we couldn't hire 35, if we weren't able to let staff take other steps to respond to the recommendations, including the idea of having some oversight FTEs as well.
I'm prepared to let that stand as a direction, that the general manager can have some flexibility, but I can tell you that we have discussed this, and the $800,000 is only a part-year effect, because we recognize there's training and staffing that will take some time, so it's not the full-year impact. So, but staff seem to be confident that they would be able to hire the 35 in a timely fashion. Okay? Okay, thank you, Councillor Nussbaum. Councillor Brockington.
What if the motion said we would like to direct staff to, if they had up to $800,000, come back to this committee in a month and tell us how you would allocate that $800,000, because the chair has made that decision through her motion. And prior to 2 hours ago, we weren't privy to what those recommendations would be. So no one is doubting the need for more PSWs, but I'm not confident that it all should go into that pot. And so either today you are just so firm in your confidence that this is how that $800,000 should be allocated, or we potentially put a different motion on the floor that says, think about this over the next month and the intent is to allocate $800,000, you tell us how you need to spend that $800,000. I think you should be bringing that direction to us. So the councillors identified the money, and you give us the crystal clear direction that you think we should be going. So what would your reaction be to that direction?
Madam Chair, we do have a number of PSWs right now that work part-time. There are approximately 22 of them. So we certainly can move from them being part-time to going full-time, recognizing that we do have to look at our hiring practices, and that could be done fairly quickly. Then there would be an external competition that would be needed. We will look at any of these other recommendations in terms of moving forward if we think they are a priority. So one example is Mr. Fougere identified the need for 5 other registered personnel. In the budget from the province, they did identify 1 new nurse per home. So there is a lot of moving parts, absolutely. We will put forward the best solution going forward, but having participated in many of the sessions with families and residents and staff, as well as consistently, and we also heard from the Auditor General this morning that the need for personal support workers is great. If it is the direction of a committee for us to come back next month and put our recommendations forward, we can certainly do that as well, but we would like to get started immediately.
I'm putting it to you because if you feel that the best direction to go in this regard is the motion that's on the floor now, then I will take your advice on that matter. But I think there is some utility in taking a breath. That the report is extensive. There's been 0 public consultation. There's been no pre-release of this report. We may hear some positive things from our community who would like to provide some input before this committee and council makes a decision. And so that's why I'm looking to you. I'm looking to you with that question. Let me just let you think about that, and I'm going to move on with some other questions. So I had asked when Fougere provided his report why this wasn't pre-released. Can you let me know?
Madam Chair, the practice of the city is that all independent reviews come to committee before they go public, so we followed that same process today.
And I see the city clerk here. Is practice policy, or is practice just how we've just always done it?
Practice is the latter, Mr. Chair, or Madam Chair.
How we've always done it. I just want to say that for something as important as this, that has got such public attention and scrutiny over such a long time period, that there would have been great value to pre-release this report. I had a delegation of constituents in my office on Friday of last week wanting to know when they could see the report, who were unable to be here today, who wanted to provide me with some comments in advance. And I see a lot of staff in the gallery and not a lot of members of the public. So I just wanted to state my concern with that. My question to Mr. was about the difference between a provincial average and what Ottawa needs. What Ottawa's needs are. The needs of residents differ from municipality just based on their own personal needs. But I want to make sure that we are providing the best possible care, and I don't want us to get hung up on a number, a provincial average. We had extensive conversation at this committee, and I don't know whether it was part of the budget process or part of a reaction to another report, where we continuously asked you if Ottawa's score below the provincial average needed to be addressed. And we were basically assured that even though you acknowledged we were below the provincial average, we could still make do. We could still provide quality care to our residents. You talked about some of the factors at play, but basically you gave this committee assurances that we were still providing quality care and that we were still getting along well, and yet today you say you welcome the recommendations. So I'm troubled that there was talk prior to the 2018 budget, at least contemplated, or at least talked about the concerns about the City of Ottawa scoring below the provincial average, and some members contemplating allocating additional resources, but we were basically assured and reassured that the quality of care is satisfactory. You had talked about some of your preliminary conversations with family members, and yes, that there were some perhaps outlier issues, but that we were getting by. I'm just finding it hard today to hear senior staff say we recognize and acknowledge the recommendations before us when we're having very similar conversations at least 6 months ago, and we, the committee and council, didn't act to put resources in when they were needed at that time. Can I just ask if there will be any pressure to increase the fees that are charged residents who stay in our long-term care homes? Talk today about using reserve funds to offset the additional costs to add staff, but I'm sure questions from the public will be if the city is going to incur additional costs, whether there'll be any upward pressure on fees charged to residents.
So, Madam Chair, the co-payments established in long-term care are set by the province, and they're fixed across the province. Currently today, a resident living in a basic room pays $1,820, and a resident living in a private room pays $2,600.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess my last line of questioning are about the PSWs who really do fine work, and I want to acknowledge the vast majority, just like in every other industry really, care about the residents in our homes and are there for the right reasons. But certainly, as Mr. Fogel indicated, there are perhaps people who maybe this isn't their calling. How do you review the performance of, and I don't want to just focus on PSWs, but staff who work in homes on a, let's say, annual basis? How do you identify shortcomings in their skill set, and how do you identify improvements? I want to make sure that something's in place before these recommendations come out, but ultimately the goal should be how do we get the best staff, best trained staff, identify gaps, and give them the training that they need.
So, Madam Chair, our recruitment process, as I mentioned earlier today, is going to change in terms of the tools that we're going to be using for screening people in. Staff, we have individual developmental plans for staff. That's to help them grow and be trained in certain areas. And if an employee is unable, after being provided the training, to be able to deliver the care and services accordingly, then we would look at going a different direction around performance management with that particular individual, up to and including discipline, which could result in the termination of the employee for unsuitability in the position.
Thank you for that. Madam Chair, I'm going to end my questioning, but I was wondering if I could ask the clerk's office to draft some wording for me to consider regarding my first line of question, and that would be for this committee to direct staff over the next month before the intent would be to come back to the next CPS meeting to identify a plan on how they would allocate the $800,000 that's been identified in Councillor Dean's motion, but the intent would be to allow staff to come back and report to this committee their plan to allocate those funds. So that's just general wording, but
I suppose you can ask the clerk to do it for you, and we can put it before the committee, but for my part, very comfortable with the motion that the mayor and I worked on over the weekend and we put forward here today. I can tell you that there has been 6 months of extensive consultation with the families and with residents in the home, and the recommendations. We've worked with city staff on these recommendations. I feel very confident in saying that everyone's in agreement that we need to get on with hiring these personal support workers now. So I don't think that there's a reason to complicate it by bringing it back. I think what we really have to do is get on with hiring more staff in these
Well, let
homes.
me just ask, is this the best recommendation before us? 'Cause I caught some hesitancy when I asked. If you believe this is the right way to go, you don't need a month to come back to us and clearly indicate how you'd like to allocate those 800,000, then I'll accept the Dean's motion. But I think that, I mean, Councillor Dean's had the privy of advance notification of the report. I didn't. And we're being asked to basically think about how to spend $2.3 million annualized. If you say this is the best direction, then I'm not going to proceed with any other motion, because I'm looking for your advice.
Madam Chair, I apologize if I was hesitant. That's not my intent. Unanimously, we heard that more personal support workers is the priority. What I was saying is potentially if we cannot hire sufficient personal support workers between now and the end of the year, because we want to hire the right people, we want hiring practices, we want to look at language, attitude, suitability, all those things are important. We want to hire the right people. So if there's other folks that we can hire that will support some of this other change, then we will do that and then come forward in 2019 with the full 35 FTEs for personal support worker if we cannot find enough people between now and the end of the year.
Appreciate that clarification, and I do support that direction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In the meantime, Councillor Nussbaum has given me a suggestion for a friendly amendment, which I'm going to accept as friendly. So the resolution will now say, therefore be it resolved that Community and Protective Services Committee and that City Council approve that 35 new additional FTEs in long-term care services for personal support workers or other new positions as the general manager determines are necessary, and then the rest of the motion. So we're giving you a little added flexibility. Okay. Councillor Druce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is I'm very happy with the new language in, because I really don't want to. I didn't want to not support the motion because we all know that we need extra PWS, and I totally agree. And if you ask anybody in the city, we need those personnel to help our residents and our people in our long term. But my problem is the review didn't look at the big picture. We didn't look at the managerial. Like we have so many management, and I like to see in the next report or before for next year when you do a review, you need to also look at your management expenses, because if you want to find a saving or efficiency, always on the frontline worker. We always know that we need more people to serve the resident. But I'm not sure in our practice and the practice that our long-term facilities are equivalent to non-profit or any other facility, because I know from a personal experience, I sit on another long-term and I know our management level and I see the deficiency and I see we're getting so many layers. You have manager for everything almost. So I mean, are we really looking at the picture only on the lower level? We're not looking into the management expense, and that's concern me. And I like, in the next review, I like to ask a recommendation, if the chair will allow, that we need to review those expenses and those management, layer of management we have, and see if we find the deficiency so we can hire more PWS. And that's where I really look at for our resident. Because you have too many soldiers, you have too many chief, you don't have enough soldiers. And that's the way I look at it into our practices. So I will be supporting the motion in making sure in the next review, we will review our structure and how many management we have, and we compare them to another nonprofit facilities.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Druce. Councillor Kakish.
Thank you, Chair. In your presentation, you have a section about training, preventive abuse, dementia, on-call abuse awareness, and all that. So are you doing this for the new staff or the existing staff, and where are you getting the funding to do this from?
Madam Chair, the training on abuse is a legislated annual mandatory training for all staff. All new staff, when they're going through general orientation, that training is provided in person. And as a result of the plans we put forward to the ministry last year, all of our abuse training now is done person with our staff. We're using scenarios around abuse and neglect so staff have a better understanding of what that looks like, but it's done every year with all of our staff.
And as opposed to before, was it not done in person?
Exactly. In the past, we have a software called Surge Learning, and a lot of the training modules were done online. Because of the priority around the safety of our residents and staff's ability to distinguish between what abuse and neglect look like, we wanted to, in-class sessions, have a discussion as a group and have a better understanding of both the definition, the duty to report, and our duty to protect our residents.
Okay, because one of my questions is with regards to, obviously there's a lot of my colleagues, it sounds like, are hesitant or reluctant to put all our eggs in one basket because we've obviously seen there's multiple elements and factors based on the presentation, and there's a lot of information to digest here. So we just want to make sure that we're making the right and strategic and effective decision to prevent these incidents from happening in the future. And I was wondering if there's any benefit in your mind to allocating some more dollars for training or better training or different types of training, because we're just talking about FTEs. We're not talking about getting or training those people to do the right job or become better at what they're doing. So is there a benefit instead of just focusing on the FTE count that we're actually investing in the current people that are doing these difficult jobs?
Madam Chair, our current budget has $265,000 that we use for our legislative training with our staff. As part of the ask, the $1 million, there'll be an opportunity. There's several different training options within our plan, and we'll be looking to allocate the appropriate dollars from the capital funds that are given to us to ensure that we train all staff in the areas that we've identified in our plan.
But why would that be coming from your capital dollars if it's HR related?
So there is a report going to FEDCO tomorrow for an establishment of a one-time capital account for $1 million for training,
yeah, but you
technology,
listed a bunch of
and equipment.
Okay.
So it's those three things, and if that's approved, that could go towards funding some of the training, and that's in addition to the $800,000.
What's left over if you're investing in all those things for training, if you're investing that $1 million in all those things you just listed?
So it's finding the balance. So if we look at what we need in terms of the equipment that we need, we'll purchase that. The technology that we've heard is very important in ensuring our accuracy and freeing up staff to be more available to residents. And part of technology is having the required training. So again, we will go back. And it gives the general manager the discretion at looking at what the priorities are between the equipment, the training, and the new technology.
Okay, and on that, are we also on this motion, Chair, that we have, are we able to add some flexibility? Because even with the friendly amendment that Councillor Newsbaum brought forward, we're just talking about FTEs, we're not talking about potentially training or some other resources that might be needed to help.
It's a different pool of money. The $800,000 is for hiring staff. The $1 million that we're talking about tomorrow is for training, equipment, and IT.
Yeah, so is there going to be flexibility though from here? Are we able to put some money towards that in case we do need it, if that $1 million's not enough?
You mean some of the $800,000 to the training? No, because we need all of that money for hiring the staff.
Okay, but I guess one of the takeaways for me today is that it's not just an FTE issue, right? It's that there's issues with training and there's other things. So that $1 million's going to be eaten up by quite a bit of capital. There's not much left. So, and that's my concern.
Well, at FEDCO tomorrow, we're going to be talking about the capital requirement. If you think $1 million isn't enough, I think there's an opportunity tomorrow to ask them to augment that amount of money.
Okay. So can staff just confirm that? Is there no flexibility of moving money from what's before us today to things other than the FTEs?
I think that between the $800,000 for the new staff and the $1 million for the equipment, technology, and training, we will have an excellent plan for this year, and any resulting delta or needs going forward we can identify in the 2019 budget. We've implemented a great number of plans and training to this date with very little to no cost, and so we will continue to do so. And I'm very confident that this injection of funding will go a long way to resolving any pressures that we have this year.
Mm-hmm. So one of the other lacking areas that was mentioned in the presentation was about, you know, the outdated facilities that we have and how some incidents can happen amongst residents. So again, another area where it's been flagged for us and we're not doing anything about it. So do you see my concern here is we're cornering ourselves into one pool of funding. We're not addressing the other issues that were highlighted to us. So how do you address that? What are your terms for infrastructure improvements to our existing facilities?
So, Madam Chair, currently in the province of Ontario, there's the redevelopment opportunity for long-term care homes. All of our 4 homes are A-bed homes. So the A-bed homes at this time are not eligible for the redevelopment funding. It's based on B and C beds that are out there in the province. So at some point in time, our beds will be identified for redevelopment, and that'll be an opportunity to look at it. But also, if we're doing renovations within the homes, we can look at with infrastructure and looking at best practices around the design, especially for dementia care units, that we would look at adapting that on any of the renovations that we do in the homes.
Okay. With regards to the volunteers, in the report indicated that they're down. They've been down since 2015. What are some of the issues, or where are we seeing? What's the reason for that? Is there anything? Is it difficult to get people to help out, or is there any specific issues that have been happening to explain the decrease in the number of volunteers?
So, Madam Chair, for the first 3 months of this year, we've seen a 6.5% increase in the volunteer hours from our volunteers. We have over 600 active volunteers in our homes. And Greg alleviated to this earlier, but volunteerism is declining. We're looking at working closely with our families that are associated with residents in the home to be working around getting them registered as volunteers, to see if they can support us around the meal times where it's very difficult for staff because of the pressures. Over 40% of our residents require assistance with feeding. So we need to look at how we're recruiting our volunteers and looking for opportunities to, as I said, engage families, friends of residents, and it is in our strategic plan that we're actively recruiting volunteers all the time.
Okay, and are they allowed to do some of the physical stuff as well in terms of helping the residents, or are they limited to what they can do? What can a volunteer do at a retirement, at one of the group homes?
Madam Chair, our volunteers are used for a number of things, as I said, for feeding residents, porting residents to and from activities, actually running activities in the home. They do friendly one-on-one visits. They will take residents for walks on the property. They do a number of different things. Some of our volunteers are entertainers to the home, so they may provide a music program for our residents. They may do a baking program, a sewing, knitting. There's a multitude of position descriptions for our volunteers, and so we have a vast amount of programs that they support in the homes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. You know, I'm not sure where the motion is at now, but I'd like to see as much flexibility in terms of the direction that's given to staff so that they could utilize those dollars in the most effective and efficient and strategic way to prevent those incidents. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I apparently, unfortunately, cut Councillor Drew short of getting his answer to his question about a review of the management layers. So do you recall the question, and can you answer it?
So a couple of the recommendations that Mr. Fougere put forward was to look at the service delivery model, and in terms of various levels, a top and the homes. So if you look at the attachment to the transmittal report, there is a commitment to doing that. So as part of the 2019 report back and as part of the budget, we will absolutely have completed that review, and we'll be able to look at any efficiencies or any approaches that we can take to balance the homes, make sure that the services and the care is as responsive to residents as possible, and with a focus on direct care.
Perfect. I also want to make sure we are comparing ourselves to other long-term facility in the city with a nonprofit and profit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dewar. Sorry about that. Okay, so just a couple questions from me. One, I was told the report would be released for all to have a copy of today, and then there's been some questions about that actually happening. So I'm looking over to you, Mr. Kanalakis. Can you just guarantee that the report will be made available now?
We're going to release it to everybody but John Willing. No, I'm only kidding. No. It'll be, no, Madam Chair, will be released at the end of the meeting. There's just a few little adjustments that Mr. Fougere has committed to make. We found a couple of typos, but it will be released.
Thank you very much for that. And there's also been some questions today about the 2018 budget and the number that was plugged in, if it was artificially low. So I just wanted to give staff an opportunity to answer that question.
So, Madam Chair, the 2017 budget was there was a $12.3 million commitment on behalf of the city. In 2019, it increased to $13.7 million, $870,000 increase, which is a 7% increase. Where you see a difference is between actuals in 1 year and the actuals in the next year. And that is because any staff absenteeism or modified unit, then we have to, because we're 24/7 and we need to maintain these ratios and we don't want to work short, what we do is we fill those sick leave spots. So what we're finding this year is we are spending above the to the same rate as we spent last year, and we'll continue to do so as we respond to the sick leave in our homes, recognizing there's outbreaks that occur, and they vary from year to year. The $800,000 that you're proposing this year would go a long way going forward to having a base budget solution. That would be the budget itself. The actuals will always be higher because we have to replace for sick leave in our homes.
Okay, but if it's consistent year over year that we're replacing for sick leave, wouldn't we do a base budget adjustment to reflect that?
The sick leave requirement varies year over year, and we're working with staff. We're working towards having that healthy workplace and ensuring that the proper practice is in place so there's less injuries and those sorts of things. So it does fluctuate from year to year. At some point, committee may want to look at putting some additional funding for a bit of a balance from year to year, but it does fluctuate from year to year.
Okay. Thank you for those questions. Seeing no further questions, if I can find the motion. Oh, you took it, the motion. Who took it? Toby took it? Okay, well, somebody took the motion. But I think we know what the motion says, right? Yeah, it's just slightly to give the staff a little bit more flexibility. Therefore, be it resolved, the Community and Protective Services Committee recommend that City Council approve that 35 new additional FTEs in long-term care services for personal support or other new positions as the GM determines are necessary, and that $800,000 be provided from the one-time and unforeseen account to permit the hiring to take place in 2018. Can we carry that motion? Carried? Thank you. And then on the report, carried? Thank you. I think it's carried. There's recommendations in it. Isn't it? Okay, well, you're the lawyer, Toby, but I think, yeah, okay.
We're receiving the findings.
Yeah, we're receiving the findings, but the report says that the Community and Protective Service Committee recommend that council, so is it not a recommendation? So we carry that recommendation and we receive those findings, okay? Okay. I should go to law school. Okay, so then on notices of motion, inquiry, other business adjourned. Thank you all, and thank you to the staff.